My name is Helen Margaret Rhodes, and I am 89 years old. People say autumn is the season of endings, but for me, one autumn was a beginning I never forgot. It was 1966, and I had just moved back to my hometown in Vermont after my father fell ill. I worked part-time at a tiny bookshop on Maple Street, a creaky, warm place that always smelled of old pages and cinnamon tea. Life felt predictable, almost too quiet, until the day he walked in. The bell above the door chimed softly. A tall man stepped inside, brushing leaves from his coat. He wore wire-framed glasses and carried a stack of papers under his arm. He looked around with a smile that suggested he already loved the place. "Excuse me," he said, his voice gentle and scholarly. "Do you have the collected poems of Rilke?" "We do," I replied, leading him to the poetry corner. As I reached for the book, he spoke again. "I'm Thomas," he said, "Thomas Avery. I'm teaching a guest seminar at the university this month." I introduced myself, but before I could hand him the book, he said, "Oh no, may I see which poem you open to first? People reveal themselves in their first choices." I laughed nervously, but opened the book. My fingers landed on a verse about longing, quiet, patient longing. His eyes lit up. "A romantic, then," he said softly. "No," I protested, blushing. "Just someone who thinks a lot." "That's what I meant," he smiled. He returned the next day, then the day after that. Not always to buy something, sometimes just to talk. We discussed books, of course, but also music, travel, dreams, sorrows we didn't know we were confessing. Thomas had a way of listening that made silence feel like part of the conversation. He spoke slowly, choosing words like an artist chooses colors. One afternoon, as we sipped tea among stacks of forgotten novels, he said, "May I take you somewhere? A place I go when my thoughts feel too loud." I hesitated, then nodded. He led me through the gold-red forest to a small wooden bridge overlooking a quiet river. "This," he said, leaning on the railing, "is where I come to remember that time doesn't have to rush." We stood there for a while without speaking. The wind danced with my hair. Leaves drifted like soft confetti around us. "I wish life felt like this more often," I whispered. Thomas looked at me gently. "It can," he said. "Sometimes all it takes is choosing the right company." My breath caught. He brushed a leaf from my shoulder, slow enough to give me time to pull away, but I didn't. As weeks passed, autumn deepened, and so did we. One evening, after closing the shop, he stayed behind to help me stack boxes. When the last box settled, we found ourselves standing very close. He removed his glasses slowly, cautiously, as if the moment would shatter. "Helen," he whispered, "you feel like a chapter I wasn't expecting to read, but now I can't put you down." I didn't answer with words. I kissed him, a quiet, certain kiss that tasted like cinnamon tea and warm pages. We spent nearly every day together, walking through forests painted gold, reading aloud to each other, sharing confessions under lamplight. He told me he'd never married because he'd been waiting for someone whose silence felt as comfortable as their laughter. I told him I was afraid of choosing wrong. He laughed softly. "Then choose gently. That's all anyone can do. But life, as it often does, reminded us that seasons don't last. One afternoon, Thomas arrived at the shop with an unfamiliar heaviness in his eyes. My department offered me a permanent position in Boston. My heart tightened. "That's wonderful," I forced myself to say. "It is," he whispered, "but I don't want to leave you." Hope flickered painfully in my chest. "Then stay," I said quietly. His face fell. "Helen, your father needs you. Your mother depends on you. I know you can't uproot your life, and I can't ask you to." Silence settled between us like falling leaves. "So this is goodbye?" I whispered. He stepped closer, touching my cheek with trembling fingers. "It doesn't have to be," he said, "but it will be different." We both knew what he meant. Distance changes people, not for lack of love, but for lack of presence. Still, we tried. For months we exchanged long letters, pages filled with poetry, memories, and hopes too fragile to speak aloud. But as my father's condition worsened, my days became long shifts of caregiving. Nights became exhaustion. His letters came less often, mine even less. Not out of loss of love, but loss of time, loss of energy, loss of possibility, until eventually the correspondence faded altogether, not because we stopped loving, but because life claimed the parts of us we could no longer protect. Years passed. My father died. I married a kind man later in life. We built something good, stable, tender. But every autumn, when the leaves turn and the air smells like old books, I think of Thomas, and I imagine him walking into that bookshop again, glasses slightly crooked, carrying a poem he wanted to share with me. If I could speak to the young woman I was in 1966, standing in a forest of gold and red leaves, I would tell her, "Some loves aren't meant to be lived every day. Some are meant to be remembered, quietly, gratefully, like a beautiful book you once read and never forgot." That is my story, the story of the professor who taught me to love words and taught me how deeply a heart can remember.